At my parents' anniversary dinner, in front of everyone, my mother joked that my brother Kyle had a crush on my wife. When the table laughed, I confronted her, until Mara said one calm sentence that drained the color right from my mother's face. My mother was pointing her fork at my wife when I set mine down. Not the chandelier light on the white tablecloths. Not the anniversary cake waiting near the wall. Not even the sound of 32 people laughing in that uncertain way people laugh when they are trying to decide whether cruelty has been socially approved. Just my mother, Helen Mercer, in the silver dress she had texted me about 3 weeks earlier, holding a salad fork toward Mara like she was offering a toast. "Oh, Kyle has had a huge crush on Daniel's wife for years," she told my Aunt Linda. Huge. A few relatives chuckled. My cousin Patrick looked down at his plate. His wife Jenna went very still. My father, Thomas, lifted his water glass and did not drink from it. Kyle sat 2 seats away from my mother. He did not look humiliated. "That is what I need you to understand." He lowered his chin and smiled into his napkin, letting color move into his face in a way that might have looked like embarrassment to people who had not spent years watching him enjoy being forgiven before anyone accused him. Mara sat beside me, calm, hands folded near her plate. Too calm. That was how I knew she had heard it exactly the way I had. My Aunt Linda, who had been out of the family weather long enough to mistake thunder for conversation, turned to Mara and smiled. "Well, do you have any pretty sisters or cousins you could introduce Kyle to? Someone with your cheekbones?" The table waited. That was the worst part. They waited to see whether I would swallow it. Again. I set my fork down. The sound was small, metal against china, but in that room it landed like a door locking. Everyone looked at me. I looked at my mother. "How dare you?" I said. "Let me go back, because the anniversary dinner was not the beginning. You cannot understand what happened at that table without understanding the 38 years that taught everyone in my family which behavior would be excused and which person would be expected to absorb it. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 38 years old. I have been married to Mara for 6 years, and before that, I spent most of my life being what my mother proudly called the responsible son. In my family, that did not mean respected. It meant low maintenance. It meant I could be counted on to show up, carry chairs, fix printers, drive people to appointments, stay calm, pay my own way, and not make my feelings inconvenient. My mother, Helen, is 64. To people outside our family, she is charming in a way that feels almost effortless. Quick laugh, thoughtful gifts, perfectly timed hand on someone's arm when she wants to seem warm. Inside the family, warmth was usually packaging. The harm came wrapped as a joke, a concern, an observation, a little comment she would later swear had been harmless if anyone reacted strongly enough to make her accountable. She never stabbed directly when she could make you look dramatic for bleeding. My father, Thomas, is 67, a retired civil engineer and a decent man in the limited, painful way some decent men are. He believes in kindness, loyalty, and keeping peace, but he has spent most of his marriage mistaking peace for silence. He loves my mother. He also avoids her. Both things can be true. He built bridges for 35 years and somehow spent 4 decades refusing to inspect the cracks in his own house. Then there was Kyle. My younger brother, 35, the one my mother described as sensitive or just Kyle, depending on the size of the mess. Kyle did not have to be responsible because responsibility had already been assigned to me. He was charming, careless, forgiven in advance. If Kyle crossed a line, everyone explained the line away. If I objected, I was rigid. If Mara objected, she was influencing me. That was the system. Kyle got permission, my mother got control, my father got quiet, and I got told I was overreacting. By the time my mother pointed that fork at my wife, the room was not witnessing a joke. It was witnessing a family structure finally showing its teeth. Mara is 37, a structural engineer, and the calmest person I have ever known who is not passive. People mistake calm for softness when they have never watched someone decide exactly where a boundary belongs and then hold it without raising their voice. Mara understands pressure for a living. Load paths, failure points, materials that look solid until stress finds the weakness everyone ignored. She talks about buildings that way, but over the years I realized she sees families clearly for similar reasons. She knows when something is bearing too much weight. We met 8 years ago at a friend's birthday dinner in a restaurant too loud for actual conversation. She sat across from me, asked what I did, and then listened to the answer like it mattered. Not polite listening. Real listening. The kind that makes you realize how many people only pause so they can take their turn. By the end of dinner, I knew 2 things. Mara did not perform interest, and being seen by her felt different from being managed. I introduced Mara to my family after 3 months. The first warning sign was small enough to explain away, which is how those things usually survive. Kyle was in the living room when we arrived, half sprawled on my parents' couch like he still lived there, and the rest of us were visiting his set. He stood when Mara came in, smiled, took her hand, held it too long. Not long enough for anyone else to say something. Long enough for me to notice. Mara noticed too. I felt it in the way her fingers tightened once around mine afterward. Not fear, not alarm, just information being filed. I filed it under Kyle being Kyle. That was the family category for things nobody wanted to examine. The second warning came at Christmas. Mara had gone near the kitchen to refill her water. Kyle followed 2 minutes later. I found them by the counter, and nothing obvious was happening. That was almost the problem. Kyle was leaning against the cabinet, smiling too privately. Mara stood with her glass in both hands, polite, but angled slightly away from him. When he saw me, Kyle straightened. Mara was asking about the lake trip, he said. Mara looked at me, calm as ever. No, she said. Kyle was telling me I should come sometime when you're busy. The room behind us kept laughing over dessert. I remember thinking I should say something. Instead, I told myself it was awkward, not serious. That was easier than admitting my brother had just tested a door. The third warning was a text message. Kyle sent it to Mara 7 months into our relationship. Not a group chat, not a family thread, directly to her phone, which he had never been given by either of us. Hey, there's a gallery thing downtown Saturday. You should come. Don't worry about telling Daniel. He hates crowds anyway. Mara showed it to me within 20 minutes. Then I read her reply. I don't keep things from Daniel. Please don't text me privately again. That was it. Clean. No performance. No paragraph explaining herself to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. I looked at her across the table. I'm sorry, I said. Mara's face softened. You didn't send it. No, I said, but I know the family that will explain it away. I called my mother that night. That was my first mistake in a long line of mistakes labeled handling it privately. Helen listened while I explained the text. She made the soft humming sound she used when she wanted you to believe she was receiving information fairly, when really she was already arranging it into a shape that protected the person she preferred. When I finished, she said, "Oh, Daniel." Just that. Like my name was the problem. Mom, he texted my girlfriend directly and told her not to tell me. Kyle has always had a little thing for the women you date, she said. You know how he is. There it was. The family spell. You know how he is. A phrase designed to turn a pattern into a personality trait. and a personality trait into something everyone else was rude for naming. That doesn't make it harmless, I said. He's not going to do anything, she replied. Don't embarrass him over nothing. Nothing. That was the word she chose for my brother, trying to create a secret with the woman I loved. The moment I carried longest happened on my wedding day. Mara and I had chosen a small ceremony. 42 people. A restaurant venue with exposed brick, white flowers, and food good enough that people would remember the meal instead of the centerpieces. I was in the groom's room with Aaron Mills, my best man, trying to fix a cufflink that had developed opinions 5 minutes before the ceremony. The room had a narrow window cracked open because the air conditioning was losing its fight with June. Through it, the hallway carried voices too clearly. I heard my mother first. Then Mara. Not every word, just pieces. Helen's voice, soft and intimate in the way she sounded when she wanted cruelty to look like concern. Mara, sweetheart, I just want you to be sure. I stopped moving. Aaron looked at me. Mara said something I could not catch. Then my mother's voice came through clean. It's not too late, you know. Nobody would blame you. My hand froze around the cufflink. There are sentences that do not need volume to split something. That was one of them. Aaron's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough that I knew he had heard it too. The hallway went quiet a minute later. Then Mara came in. I asked, what did she say? So we got married. And it was a good wedding. That matters to say. My father cried. Aaron's toast was too long and somehow perfect. Mara smiled at me like the whole room had disappeared. We talked about it on the 4th night of our honeymoon, in a hotel bathroom in Lisbon, because I had finally asked again and she had finally stopped protecting the day. I called my mother from the balcony after Mara fell asleep. We both knew that was a lie. I hung up and stood outside in the dark, understanding that one day I would have to choose between keeping peace and protecting my marriage. I just did not know how long I would keep mistaking peace for survival. After the honeymoon, I started using the word eventually. Eventually, I would talk to my mother properly. Eventually, I would tell my father how much his silence cost the rest of us. Eventually, I would stop letting Kyle's behavior get translated into personality before anyone could call it disrespect. Eventually is a dangerous word. It feels like a plan when it is really a place to store fear. So 3 more years passed. My mother kept smiling. Kyle kept orbiting. My father kept the peace by refusing to inspect what the peace required. And I kept performing the role I had been trained for. The reasonable son. The calm one. Until Mara finally said, you know, taking it is not the same thing as handling it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, 40 years of marriage printed across the top like a verdict nobody was supposed to appeal. Thomas and Helen Mercer request the pleasure of your company at a dinner celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Bellwether Banquet Hall, Riverton, Ohio. Dinner, dancing, family slideshow. My mother had been planning it for months. She had called me about table linens, flower height, guest flow, whether navy looked too severe for October. I had given measured, supportive answers because that was what I did. I supported the production of our family looking better than it felt. The invitation sat on our kitchen counter for 3 days. I walked past it the way you walk past something you are not ready to touch, because touching it makes the decision real. Mara picked it up on the 3rd night. What if we go? She asked. I looked at her. And if she crosses the line, Mara continued, she does it in front of everyone. That was the first time either of us said the strategy clearly. Witnesses. My mother's power lived in private rooms. Phone calls, Hallways, side conversations, little comments that could later be softened, denied, reframed, or turned into concern. If I reacted privately, she could make me the problem publicly. If she acted publicly, in front of the people she usually performed for, the room would have to decide what it had seen. "You think she'll do it?" I asked. Mara gave me a sad little smile. "Daniel," she said, "when your mother has an audience, she forgets the difference between charming and cruel." I sat down at the kitchen table. The invitation was between us. 32 guests, family mostly, people who had known me since I was a child and had settled into their opinions of who I was. The reasonable son. The quiet one. The one who did not make scenes. I looked at Mara. "And if she does it?" Mara held my eyes. "Then we stop helping her hide behind the joke." "What is the line?" I asked. Mara did not answer immediately. That is one of the things I trust most about her. She does not call something a boundary just because she is hurt. She takes a second to locate it. "If your mother brings Kyle's crush into the room," she said, "if she makes my discomfort into entertainment in front of your family, that is the line. And then we don't take it outside. We don't manage it privately. We say what is true in front of the people she expects to laugh." I nodded. "Witnesses," I said. "Witnesses," she answered. "We had been seeing Dr. Elaine Porter for 18 months by then. Not because our marriage was broken. I want to be precise about that, because people love turning therapy into evidence that something is failing. Our marriage was not failing. It was carrying pressure from outside the structure, and Mara knew enough about structures to know pressure does not become harmless just because you refuse to name it. Elaine was a licensed clinical psychologist who specialized in family systems and boundary dynamics. She had a quiet office with gray chairs, plants that were definitely real, and the particular patience of someone who never rushed silence just because it made other people uncomfortable. She was the first professional I told the full story to without editing it into something cleaner. Kyle's texts. My mother's jokes. The wedding hallway. My father's silence. All the little moments I had spent years shrinking down so they would fit inside the word complicated. When we told Elaine about the anniversary dinner, she did not immediately approve or warn us away. She asked, "What do you want from that night?" I looked at Mara. Then back at Elaine. "I want them to show what they are doing in front of people who cannot be told a different version afterward." Elaine let that sit. "What if they do not cross the line?" "Then we leave politely," I said. "We reassess. We don't force a confrontation." "And if they do?" Mara answered before I could. "Then we stop protecting Helen from the consequences of being heard clearly." Elaine nodded slowly. I believed her. I did not fully understand her. "There is a difference." At the table, Elaine continued, "Your nervous system will want either escape or escalation. Neither has to make the decision. Decide now what you will and will not do." So we did. No shouting first. No personal attacks unless they became necessary truth. No dragging Kyle through the mud beyond what he had actually done. No letting Helen turn Mara into the villain. And no leaving quietly if my mother turned my wife's discomfort into a family joke again. I remember Elaine looking at me after we said all of it. "Daniel," she asked, "are you ready for your family to dislike the version of you that protects your marriage?" That question stayed with me all week. By Saturday, the answer was yes. The other conversation that mattered happened 4 days before the dinner. Aaron Mills met me for coffee at a place near his office, still wearing his contractor badge on a lanyard and looking like he had already decided to be worried before I sat down. Aaron had been my best man. He was also the only person besides me who had heard my mother in that hallway on my wedding day. I told him the plan. Not dramatically, just the facts. Bellwether, 32 guests. Helen, Kyle, the line Mara and I had agreed on. Aaron listened without interrupting, which is how I knew he understood the weight of it. Men like Aaron do not fill silence when silence is doing honest work. When I finished, he stirred his coffee even though he had not added anything to it. Is Mara okay? He asked. She's tired. And you? I looked out the window. I'm tired of wondering whether I'm being fair to people who have never worried about being fair to her. Aaron nodded once. Then he said, for what it's worth, I heard your mother that day. I looked back at him. I know. I felt something in my chest loosen and hurt at the same time. I should have said something then, Aaron said. Maybe, he said, but if you ever need someone else to say what happened, I will. I nodded. Thank you. Aaron leaned back. Go to the dinner, he said. Let the room hear it this time. Bellwether Banquet Hall in Riverton, Ohio, was the kind of place that looked elegant in photographs and slightly too bright in person. White tablecloths, gold chairs, floral arrangements tall enough to make eye contact difficult across the table. Chandeliers reflecting off polished floors with the aggressive cheer of a room designed to make family history look cleaner than it was. My parents had been planning the anniversary dinner for 8 months. 40 years of marriage. 32 guests. A slideshow, dinner, and the kind of cake my mother described as understated even though it required 2 people to carry it. Mara and I arrived at 6:46. Dinner was at 7. I wore a charcoal jacket. Mara wore a navy dress with clean lines and no jewelry except her wedding ring. She looked calm in the way she does when she has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the facts to meet it. My mother was in her element. Helen moved through the room, touching shoulders, kissing cheeks, laughing at the right volume, accepting compliments like she had organized the evening as proof that her marriage had been built without cracks. My father gave the toast at 7:31. Thomas was not an eloquent man. He never had been. But he was sincere, and that made the toast harder to hear than if it had been polished. He spoke about 40 years, hard seasons, commitment, raising 2 sons, and how marriage was the work of choosing the same person even when life changed the room around you. People applauded. My mother cried beautifully. Kyle arrived alone at 7:48. Dark jacket, open collar, hair too carefully casual. He hugged my mother first, then my father, then me with the loose confidence of someone who had never had to wonder whether the room would forgive him. When he hugged Mara, she stepped back half a second sooner than politeness required. I noticed. So did Helen. That was the thing about that evening. Mara and I were not paranoid. We were paying attention. For the first hour, everything stayed polite. Surface-level conversation, safe laughter, family updates. My cousin Patrick and his wife Jenna asked about our kitchen renovation. Aunt Linda talked about her cruise. Kyle told a story about a job opportunity that sounded temporary but had been dressed as destiny. And through all of it, my mother watched the table the way a conductor watches an orchestra. Waiting for her moment. At 8:17, Aunt Linda asked Kyle if he was seeing anyone. You good? I had not answered yet. Kyle smiled and leaned back in his chair. Nothing serious, he said. That should have been the end of it. In a healthy family, it would have been. But my mother had been waiting for a door exactly that size. Helen laughed. That bright, glassy little laugh she used when she wanted the table to know she was about to be delightful. She lifted her salad fork, still holding it loosely between 2 fingers, and pointed it toward Mara like the room had invited her to turn my wife into an anecdote. She gave the word wait. A few people laughed because a few people always laugh first. Not because something is funny, but because silence feels dangerous before anyone has identified why. Kyle lowered his chin. He did not look ashamed. My mother leaned toward Aunt Linda, already expanding the story. Mara did not move. Aunt Linda, still smiling because she did not understand the room she had walked us into, turned to Mara. Well, do you have any pretty sisters or cousins for Kyle? And the table waited. For me to take it. For Mara to smile. For Helen to win another room. I set my fork down. The sound of my fork touching the plate was not loud. It did not need to be. There are rooms where the smallest sound becomes a verdict because everyone inside already knows something has gone too far. 32 people looked at me. My mother's smile paused, still arranged on her face, but no longer connected to anything real. I looked at her. How dare you? 2 words. Quiet. No shouting. No slammed table. Nothing she could point to later and call threatening. Just the sentence she had earned. Helen blinked once. Daniel. No, I said. You don't get to make my wife uncomfortable for 6 years and then serve it as entertainment at your anniversary dinner. The table went completely still. Kyle's smile disappeared. Good. I turned to him for 1 second. You've texted my wife privately. You've tried to create moments with her at family events. You've made her manage your attention while everyone else pretended it was harmless because Mom called it charming. Kyle looked at his plate. I turned back to my mother. And you knew. You have always known. After the texts, after Christmas, after the wedding, after every conversation where I asked you to respect my marriage, you promised me you understood. My mother's jaw tightened. I looked around the table slowly. So I asked the room, how many of you think it is appropriate for a mother to announce that her younger son has a crush on her older son's wife like it is a cute family story? Nobody answered. That silence mattered. I looked back at Helen. You pointed a fork at my wife and invited this family to laugh at a boundary she has had to hold alone for years. Mara's hand found mine under the table. I squeezed it once. Then I said, I am done letting you call disrespect a joke. My mother recovered quickly. That was one of her most impressive skills, and one of the reasons people outside our family never understood what she was doing until they were already inside it. The pause lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Helen softened her face. Not her voice yet. Her face first. Daniel, she said, carefully, like my name was a fragile object I had mishandled. It was a joke. No, it wasn't. It was an innocent crush. Families tease each other. That's what families do. Kyle shifted beside her, grateful for the language being built around him. My mother looked around the table, searching for the first person willing to nod. Nobody did. So she adjusted again. I certainly didn't expect you to turn this into a scene. A scene. That was always the word. Never a boundary. Never a consequence. Never someone finally saying stop. A scene. You have always done this, Helen continued, her voice lower now, sharper under the silk. You take something light and make it heavy. You were never like this before. Then she looked at Mara. Not for long. Long enough. There it was. The old accusation, dressed as observation. Mara had changed me. Mara had made me difficult. Mara had taught me to disrespect my mother, as if I had not spent 38 years gathering the evidence myself. My mother folded her hands. I don't know what ideas your wife has put in your head, she said, but this is not who you are. Mara sat very still. Then she leaned forward. And the room changed again. Mara had been silent from the moment my mother pointed that fork. I knew that silence. It was not fear. It was calculation. Not the manipulative kind. The structural kind. The kind Mara used when she was looking at a load-bearing wall and deciding exactly where the crack had started. She leaned forward slightly. Not enough to look aggressive. Just enough that every person at the table understood she was entering the conversation by choice. "Helen," she said. My mother turned toward her with the exhausted patience of a woman preparing to forgive someone for speaking out of turn. Mara's voice stayed calm. "If everything is a joke to you, then was Victor Lane just for laughs too?" The room stopped. Not quieted. Stopped. My mother's face did something I had never seen before. The performance vanished before she could replace it. Her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes went fixed. For the first time all night, for the first time in my life maybe, Helen Mercer had no immediate expression ready. My father's water glass settled against the table with a soft click. Cal looked up. Aunt Linda stopped breathing visibly. Mara did not raise her voice. "When you betrayed your own marriage with him," she said, "was that harmless too?" Nobody moved. The name sat in the middle of the table like a plate no one wanted to touch. Victor Lane. 3 houses down. My father's friend. The neighbor whose barbecue Helen used to praise too loudly when I was a kid. My mother looked at me then. Not Mara. Me. Because she understood immediately what Mara knowing meant. "You told her," Helen said. Her voice was thin. I looked at my wife, then back at my mother. "Yes," I said, "because she's my wife." Mara sat back. The entire table understood, at the same time, that my mother had spent 6 years laughing at my marriage while hiding the wreckage of her own. I had found out about Victor Lane when I was 23. Not all at once. Family secrets rarely arrive complete. They leak through small failures in the system built to contain them. Victor lived 3 houses down from us when I was growing up. He was my father's friend, or that was the word we used for a man who came to barbecues, borrowed tools, brought over smoked ribs on holidays, and laughed too loudly at my mother's jokes. I never liked him. Not because I knew anything. The affair lasted 13 months. I learned that number from my father years later, in the kitchen at midnight, after I had come home for Thanksgiving and overheard just enough of an argument through the basement door to stop pretending the pieces were unrelated. Victor's name. My mother crying. My father saying, 13 months, Helen. I asked him the next morning. Directly. That was the first time I saw my father look truly old. He did not deny it. He sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug of coffee he never drank and told me the smallest possible version of the truth. Victor, 13 months. Discovered by accident. Marriage almost ended. Marriage did not end. I chose to stay, he said. I did not ask if he regretted it. Maybe she knew I knew. Maybe she decided if we never named it, she could keep being the woman everyone believed she was. I told Mara in our 2nd year of marriage. Not as ammunition. There are things you tell your spouse because not telling them creates a locked room inside the life you are building together. Mara listened, asked only what I needed from her, and then never used it. Not during arguments. Not once in 6 years. Until my mother looked at my wife in front of 32 people and implied Mara had corrupted me into protecting my own marriage. That was when the locked room opened. My mother stood so fast her chair scraped the floor behind her. That sound finally gave the room permission to breathe, but nobody used it. You have no right, Helen said. Her voice was different now. Not soft, not wounded, not the careful voice she used when she wanted witnesses to think she was being patient with difficult people. This was the voice under the performance. You have no right to bring that into this room. Mara did not flinch. My father said, Helen. She ignored him. Her finger turned toward me. You told her, she said. You took something private from this family and gave it to her. I felt Mara's hand beside mine under the table. Still there. Steady. She's my wife, I said. She is my family. Helen's face twisted around the sentence like it had insulted her personally. That was private. So is my marriage. The room went still again, but this silence had shape now. It was not confusion. It was recognition. You have made Kyle's behavior a public joke for 6 years, I said. You have made my wife's discomfort into entertainment. You have pointed at her, laughed about her, and expected me to help you call it harmless because that made things easier for everyone else. I did not let her take the room back. You do not get privacy for your betrayal while using mine as a punchline. For once, Helen had no joke ready. The room had changed. Not loudly. That was what made it worse for my mother. If people had shouted, she could have used the shouting. If someone had stormed out, she could have built the story around disrespect, cruelty, overreaction, a ruined milestone. Helen knew what to do with chaos. She did not know what to do with 32 people sitting perfectly still and finally seeing her clearly. Aunt Linda lowered her napkin into her lap. She looked from Mara to me, then to my mother, and I watched the last 10 minutes rearrange years of assumptions in her face. Patrick was no longer staring at his plate. Jenna had turned fully toward my mother with the expression of someone realizing that politeness had been participating without meaning to. Kyle looked smaller. Not younger. Smaller. The pleasure had left him completely. Without my mother's laughter wrapping him in innocence, what remained was a 35-year-old man who had enjoyed making his brother's wife uncomfortable and had mistaken family silence for permission. My father sat down slowly. Not defeated. Accounting. That was the word that came to me. Thomas Mercer, retired civil engineer, looking at the tablecloth like he was adding up every crack he had called harmless because repairing it would have cost too much. I saw her search for the room she knew. The sympathetic glance, the embarrassed laugh, the person willing to say, well, this got out of hand, so she could attach herself to that sentence and climb back into control. No one gave it to her. That was the point of witnesses. Not punishment. Reality shared in real time. There would be no calling Aunt Linda tomorrow and saying Daniel had always been dramatic. No telling Patrick that Mara had ambushed her. No quiet version where Kyle's crush was sweet and my wife was cold and I had been turned against my family. Everyone had heard the fork. Everyone had heard the joke. Everyone had heard Victor Lane's name land on the table and stay there. For once, my mother could not edit the room after leaving it. So she sat down and said nothing. We left at 9:18. Not dramatically. No slammed chairs. No final speech. No demand that anyone choose sides before dessert. We stood, said brief goodbyes to the people who deserved them, and walked out while the banquet hall stayed behind us, too bright and too quiet. Aunt Linda hugged Mara at the door. Longer than polite. Patrick shook my hand and held it for half a second past normal, the way men sometimes say. I saw that without trusting their voice to do it cleanly. My father did not follow us. Neither did my mother. Kyle stayed seated. In the parking lot, the October air felt colder than it should have. Mara crossed her arms against it, and I wanted to say something useful, but there are moments when language arrives too early and only makes cleanup harder. So we got in the car. I drove. For 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. The road out of Bellwether ran past closed storefronts, a gas station, a church sign with missing letters, ordinary things continuing like our family had not just split open under chandelier light. Finally, Mara said, "I'm sorry." I kept my eyes on the road. For what? For saying it without asking you first. I breathed out once. It was your secret. No, I said. It was my mother's, and my father's, and the one they made me carry once I knew. Mara turned toward the window. I reached across the console and took her hand. She spent 6 years making our marriage a punchline in rooms she controlled. I said. You said one true thing in a room she couldn't edit. Mara's fingers tightened around mine. That doesn't make it easy, she said. No, I said, but it makes it over. I knew that was not fully true. He answered on the second ring. I could hear from the silence behind him that he had been waiting. How did it go? He asked. She did it, I said. Exactly what we thought. The Kyle thing. Fork in everything. And Mara said Victor Lane's name. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "Oh man." Yeah. Are you okay? I looked toward the bedroom, where Mara had gone to change out of the navy dress. I'm tired, I said. That tracks. No, I mean tired in a way that feels worth it. Aaron was quiet again. Then he said, "Good. That's the kind that heals." My mother called the next morning at 8:43. I let it go to voicemail. That was new for me. Not missing her call. I had done that before. But choosing not to answer while fully awake, phone in my hand, watching her name pulse on the screen without letting the old training move my thumb. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I listened to it twice. Not because I expected an apology. Because I wanted to hear exactly what version of the night she had chosen to keep. She did not mention the fork. She did not mention Kyle. She did not mention Mara sitting at that table while 32 people were invited to laugh at her discomfort. Instead, Helen spoke in the careful, injured voice of a woman documenting harm done to her. She said Mara had said something cruel. She said the evening had been supposed to honor 40 years of marriage. She said bringing up old pain in front of family was unnecessary and humiliating. She said she hoped, someday, we could all move past what had happened. What had happened? Not what she had done. That difference mattered. 2 days later, I played the voicemail for Dr. Elaine Porter over the phone. When it ended, she waited. Elaine never rushed the first silence. "What do you notice?" she asked. She made herself the injured party. Yes. She left out everything before Mara spoke. Yes. She still thinks the problem is that people heard it. Elaine was quiet for a moment. The moment changed the room, she said. That does not mean it changed your mother. I sat with that. It hurt more than I wanted it to. Because some part of me had still hoped that public truth would create private accountability. It had not. But it had created witnesses. And for now, that was enough. I called my father 4 days after the dinner. Not because I was ready. Some conversations do not arrive when you feel strong enough for them. They arrive when avoiding them starts costing more than having them. Thomas answered on the third ring. Daniel. Dad. Then silence. Not empty silence. Full silence. The kind made of 40 years of marriage, one banquet hall, one name spoken out loud, and all the things our family had built around not saying certain sentences. I didn't know you knew, he said finally. I know. I should have. He stopped there. I let him. For once, I did not fill the space for him. After a while, he said, I chose to stay. That was my choice. No, he said quietly. You're asking whether there's a way to have a relationship with me that doesn't go through your mother. That hit harder than I expected. Because he had heard me. Maybe not soon enough. Maybe not loudly enough. But he had heard me. Yes, I said. That's what I want. Your mother won't like that. I know. She won't make it easy. I know that too. Another silence. Then my father said, I need time to think about what that looks like. The old me would have taken that as rejection. The new me heard it as the first honest sentence he had offered me in years. Okay, I said. We are still figuring it out. Slowly. Messily. Not like a family healing in a movie. Like people standing on ground where an old structure finally cracked, deciding whether anything honest can be built without pretending the foundation was ever solid.